This is a 2013 Mercedes-Benz SLS AMG Black Series, and it is one of the most special Mercedes-Benz models from the modern era. It's essentially a regular SLS turned up to maximum crazy with 622 horsepower, 40 more than the regular one, which wasn't exactly slow. Mercedes-Benz only built 150 of these for the entire world, 150 for the entire planet, and they're currently worth around $500,000. Today, we're going to find out why. I've borrowed this SLS AMG Black Series from CNC Motors here in Southern California. They are pretty much the dealer for crazy, cool, hard to find, exotic, and special cars. Right now, as I film this, they have in their showroom a Veyron, 2 LaFerraris, a 918 Spider, a Carrera GT, and a ridiculous amount of other insane inventory. Just going on their website is cool, but they've also just built a new facility here in Upland, California to showcase what has to be the craziest, coolest group of cars for sale anywhere on the planet. But anyway, back to the SLS Black Series. A few years ago, Mercedes used to have Black Series versions of a few of its cars. They were basically more exciting versions of standard AMG models, and this was kind of the pinnacle of the Black Series range. To make it, Mercedes took the regular SLS and they cut out some weight to make it lighter. This car is about 150 pounds lighter than a regular SLS. There were also a few aero features like that wing on the back, and there was more power. This car uses the same naturally aspirated 6.2-liter V8 as the regular SLS, but like I said, it has 40 more horsepower. It's also incredibly rare, just 150 of these for the entire world. You might see a regular SLS, but it's unlikely you'll ever encounter one of these. And yet, here it is. And so today I'm going to take you on a tour of the SLS Black Series, and I'm going to show you all the interesting quirks and cool features of one of the most special Mercedes-Benz models ever. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. And for more of my thoughts on the SLS Black Series, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've compiled a list of the cheapest used AMG models currently listed for sale on AutoTrader. Now I'm going to start on the outside with the doors, which, as you know, are gull wings, just like the old school 300 SL that Mercedes is so famous for. Now, gull wing doors, of course, always lead to some interesting questions, like, for instance, how do you open them? In this case, the door handle is typically flush with the exterior of the car. It's located at the bottom of the door. But when you walk up to the car and unlock the doors, the door handle pops out so that you can grab it and open up the gull wing door. That means if you see an SLS parked somewhere with the door handle out, it's unlocked and you can get in and steal it. But once you lock the doors, the door handle goes back in and remains flush with the body to sort of preserve the look on the side of the car. Now, if for some reason the door handle isn't popping out like you want it to, you can push this little button to the right of the door handle and then it will pop out so you can open the door. Now, of course, the other interesting thing that happens with gull wing doors is simply getting in a car with gull wing doors. You might be wondering how you do it. Well, actually, it's fairly simple. You open the door and then it's just like basically any other car. You sit down, you get in, and you're in. Now, the hard part, though, in this particular car is closing the door once you're inside. Some cars do this well, and some cars it's harder, and this is one of the hard ones. The door is so far up that you really kind of have to extend your arm and reach up. If your arms aren't as long as mine, you might actually have to kind of lean out of the seat. But once you do, you reach up, you pull the door down, and then it's closed. One other little door-related quirk, if you have a car like this, you generally get it clear broad, which means you get sort of a clear film put over the whole car so rock chips don't screw it up. One thing I like about the doors, this particular clear bra installer not only put the film on the entire car, but they even managed to put the film in these little tiny panels next to the door handle, the one with the key lock in it, and they cut out the little circle for the lock, just in case you maybe happen to get a rock chip come up and hit your door handle tiny panel that's only an inch long. This is attention to detail. That's the kind of clear bra installer you want for your supercar. Now, next up we move on to the rear, and I want to talk about the wing. And I want to mention it because the wing is probably the most easily identifiable way you can tell apart the Black Series from the regular SLS. The SLS has a tiny little wing flap that comes up at speed. This thing has this massive carbon fiber wing sitting on the trunk, and it is a very easy giveaway that you're looking at a Black Series rather than just a standard SLS. Now, interestingly, the wing creates drag, which actually slows the car down. Even though this car is faster and more exciting than a regular SLS, it's 1 mile an hour slower in top speed because of the wing and other aero bits. Another way you can tell the car apart from the regular SLS is up front. It has this little front lip spoiler that sticks out further than anything that the regular SLS has, and it's carbon fiber. And you also have these little canards on the side of the front fascia, which are designed to direct airflow and provide more downforce for a better driving experience when you're at the limit. And then we move on to the color. Now this color is called Solar Beam Yellow, and as you can see, it is very, very eye-catching. It is incredibly bright. This color is insanely rare. 150 of these cars, only about 30 to 35 of them are in this color. It was sort of like the launch color for the SLS Black Series. They showed it in all the press photos and the auto shows. The color is kind of muted now that I've come into the shade here a little bit, but when you're in the sun, it just pops. It looks absolutely stunning, very eye-catching, the perfect complement to a car with a giant rear wing like this one. And speaking of attention grabbing, it's worth noting, since I'm around back here, this car has a very loud and attention grabbing exhaust note. Take a listen. Now, next up we move on to the trunk, and to open it you just press the little trunk opener button on the key fob and it pops open, and then you just open it like a regular trunk in a regular car, which I find kind of funny because you're actually opening the trunk to one of the rarest and fastest cars of its day. But anyway, when you open the trunk, you're greeted by a couple of interesting items, the most interesting of which is the emergency trunk release. Now, in this country, by law, all car makers must include a little release for people to pull if they get stuck in a trunk so they can get out if they're being kidnapped in an SLS. In this car, the trunk release is very cool. Instead of a little handle you pull like in most cars, it's this little light that is constantly flashing all the time, even when the car is parked and turned off, so that if you're in the trunk, you find the flashing light, you push the button on the light, and then the trunk pops open and you can escape. Now, in the trunk of this particular Black Series, I happened to find the owner's manual, which is in this nice leather pouch. And I found a couple of kind of humorous items in the owner's manual. The first one is on page 234, and it's talking about winter tires. And it says at temperatures below 45 degrees, summer tires experience a loss in elasticity. Using summer tires at very cold temperatures could cause cracks to form, thereby damaging tires permanently. Fine. Then it says Mercedes-Benz cannot accept responsibility for this type of damage, implying that they can accept responsibility for other types of damage, but if you're so stupid that you use summer tires when it's cold, Mercedes-Benz simply must disavow you. I also like on page 94, there is another rather humorous Mercedes-Benz moment. It's talking about replacing the front headlight bulbs. It says, you cannot replace the front bulbs yourself. Doesn't matter how qualified you are, you cannot replace the bulbs at the front yourself. Contact a qualified specialist to carry out the work. It then says Mercedes-Benz recommends that you use an authorized Mercedes-Benz center for this purpose. Why, of course it does. Another interesting item I found pawing around in the owner's manual pouch is a copy of the original window sticker, and you can see that Solar Beam Yellow was a $12,750 option. In fact, it cost more than every other option on this car combined, plus the destination charge, plus the gas guzzler tax. $12,750 for a color, when you really have to have yellow. And our last stop before we move into the interior is under the hood, where you can see the engine. It is absolutely beautiful under here. It's very clean, obviously, but it just looks really, really cool. One interesting item about the engine that you may not realize is where it's positioned. If you take a close look, you can see the engine is really far back towards the passenger compartment, and from the side you can see that it's behind the front axles. Technically, this is a front mid-engine car rather than a true front engine car. They do it this way for weight distribution. If you stick the engine really far forward, the car feels very front heavy, which isn't good on a racetrack or other fast driving. And so by putting it in the middle, it balances the weight better, just like a Ferrari 458 has the engine in the middle, just in the back. It's kind of a cool little item that some people don't realize. Next up, we move on to the interior of the SLS Black Series, where there are a couple of interesting items worth noting. I'm going to start with the doors. Now, because of the way the doors are open, they have kind of a roof to them. That's where the hinges are. And that roof actually gives you extra headroom inside the cabin. You can see the headliner in the middle kind of comes down pretty low, but the door roof comes up a couple extra inches, so tall people have a little more headroom in the Black Series. That is kind of an interesting little quirk. Now, another interesting quirk relates to starting the engine. You get inside this car and the engine start button is lit up in bright red, so you know exactly where to press to fire up your beastly V8. But There's also a redundant second engine starter. Check this out. If you open up this little carbon fiber panel between the seats, there is a little place where you can stick the key in and twist it, just in case, for instance, your engine starter button isn't working or you just don't want to press the starter. You can actually put in a physical key and start the car that way. Now, speaking of that little carbon fiber panel you can open up for the second engine starter, it's also a little storage area. You can put tiny little items back there. It's not huge, but it is a little storage compartment, and it has an interesting quirk to it. You see the little center armrest here? Well, you can push that back and reveal this car's cup holders and also the Mercedes-Benz roadside assistance telephone number. But if you push it back, you cover up that little carbon fiber compartment in between the seats, so you can actually hide that compartment so no one really even will know that it's there. So if you want to put something very secret in there, just do it and then push back your armrest and no one will know you can even open it. Now, next up, moving into the center control stack, there are a couple of interesting items in here. One of which is in the climate controls. There's a button that says Max Cool. I thought I was already max cool because I'm driving an SLS Black Series. You're gonna stop watching now, aren't you? Anyway, right above the climate controls, there's this little plastic panel with the radio controls. And I find this plastic panel to be tremendously cheap looking. They pulled it straight out of like a base C-Class, and it's very plastic and cheap, and it doesn't really belong in a car this valuable. They just already had it, so they reused it, which is unfortunate. Now, the interesting thing about that panel is it's basically the only drawback in the entire interior. The rest of the interior is absolutely beautiful, with these seats that are gorgeous leather and Alcantara with red stitching. There's Alcantara all over the dashboard, the glove box, carbon fiber everywhere, aluminum. In fact, the dashboard itself is even finished completely in leather except for one thin strip of Alcantara across the middle with red stitching. It's almost like Mercedes-Benz is saying, we don't need to put Alcantara here, but we can. And so we will. It has no functional purpose, but it does look cool. But that plastic piece in the middle, the one that's right in the center of everything, is the one let down. It's a shame. Another interesting item in the middle is the shift lever in this car, which is rather unusual. When you have the car on, you push it forward for reverse, you pull it back for drive, and then neutral is in the middle. That's not all that weird. The weird thing is the shape of it and the fact that you can stick your finger through it. I don't know why they did it that way, but if you ever want to stick your finger through your shift lever, get an SLS Black Series. And speaking of sticking your fingers through stuff, take a look at the sun visors. They look sort of like normal sun visors, but when you put them down, you can see that they're see-through. The right and left parts of them have little holes in them, and you can kind of put your fingers back there and see through them. I've never seen see-through sun visors before. Seems to kind of defeat the purpose of a sun visor, but nonetheless, this car has it. Now, this car also has 5 switches and buttons facing towards you, the driver, when you climb inside, and they all have to do with performance. The top one changes from Comfort to Sport Plus to Manual. Then you have the engine starter, then you have traction control off, and then you have the suspension firmness, and then the final button is simply marked AMG. You push the AMG button and a interesting AMG display comes on the infotainment system with some rather unusual options. One is that it shows the car's horsepower in real time. So you can see if I feather the throttle here while we're sitting, the horsepower updates to exactly how much power we're using at this precise moment. Same with torque. Now, that's kind of common in performance cars, but there are some things in here that aren't. The craziest thing by far is the track menu. Now, if you go into the track menu, you can see that the Nürburgring is displayed, even though we're here in California. And in fact, you can choose which track you're on, and the car will save your data, although there's only 2 tracks in here, Nürburgring and Hockenheim, both of which are in Germany. But fear not, if you don't live in Germany, you can also import a track. I guess you put in a USB with a track file, and then whatever your favorite racetrack is, the car will then know. And even crazier, you can import your own track. So if you go to some racetrack that the car doesn't have, there's no file for it, you can't import it, you can tell the car you're creating a new track, drive the track, and then the car will know it, and you can give it a name so that every time you go on that track, it's saved in your AMG infotainment menu. Now, you may be wondering, why does it have this? What's the point of all these tracks? Well, the thing is, it can store your lap times, your best times in each sector of the track, your best lap, your highest speed achieved. It can store all that. So each time you get out on your favorite track, you can look back and say, oh yeah, but 3 weeks ago I ran it 3 seconds faster. Other than the AMG thing, the infotainment system is exactly like it was in basically every other Mercedes-Benz from this era. It's the same as the one in my 2012 E63 station wagon. For example, if you go to the radio tuner, you can see it has this like old-time radio tuner display like on a 50s car, except it's on an electronic screen. And if you go into system to change the system settings, for some reason a clock appears. Never really understood that, but if you ever want an analog clock on a multicolor screen, just go to System in your 5-year-old AMG infotainment system. Now, next up we move on to the gauge cluster. I'm going to start with the gauge cluster screen. Nothing particularly unusual about it. It's this old school black and white pixelated screen that looks kind of old-fashioned now, but when this car came out 5 years ago, it would have been just fine for the time. One interesting thing I like about the gauge cluster is this silver finish sort of in between the dials. It has a very upscale and high-quality look, and since you're looking there all the time, it's nice to see that. Oh, and by the way, one last interesting interior item. Remember those 5 switches and buttons for all the performance stuff over on the driver's side of the center console? Well, over on the passenger side, it looks like just sort of a blank panel with carbon fiber, but actually that's where they've hidden the ashtray, which is kind of clever. When you close it, it does just look like a nice blank panel of carbon fiber. You would never know that the ashtray is there. Interesting little hidden quirk. And so those are the quirks and features of the SLS AMG Black Series. Now it's time to get behind the wheel and drive it. Okay, driving the SLS Black. The regular SLS I drove a couple years ago and I was just blown away by it. I wasn't expecting it to be that great. These AMG cars, you don't really think about handling or precision or anything like that, but it was amazing. I was really surprised by it, and I imagine this will be similar. The ride is, of course, a little harsh going over those bumps. This thing, the regular SLS is already pretty harsh, stiff suspension obviously for handling. This car is, of course, a little bit stiffer. Once again, though, just like SLS, it actually doesn't feel as ridiculous as some crazy supercars when you're driving it. It feels like actually a vehicle that you could use if you wanted to. At the end of the day, it's still a Mercedes-Benz, and it's almost like they don't know how not to make vehicles that a person could use and drive frequently. Wow. It's really, really quick, and getting higher in the rev range, it feels really quick. There's nothing like driving a nice naturally aspirated V8 too. There's no crazy turbo lag or anything. It feels how you really want it to. Ooh, that sound. You feel like you're controlling the world in this car. The ride is rough though. Going over the little landline bumps, you can definitely feel them. It is a little bit harsh. I'm really surprised at how much mid-range power it has. The car just feels like it could go and go and go. Man, even just a little stab of the throttle and it just hauls. The steering just feels incredibly tight and precise. Even just a little tiny jerk of the wheel, you can just feel like the car knows exactly what to do and where to go. It actually, from here and just kind of sitting here and driving around, it feels like a car that I could use frequently, which surprises me because, you know, when you look at this thing and the giant wing and the gull-wing doors and you know that it's the crazy version of an already crazy car, you don't really think that. The interior is gorgeous. There's this plastic area in the center console. I don't know why Mercedes did that for years, but otherwise, it's just wonderful. There's Alcantara everywhere. There's really nice stitching. It's a really, really high quality place to be, which isn't always the case for some of these, like, you know, supercars. The seat is great. It feels really nice, feels good. It also, even though this is one of these supercars, it doesn't grip you so tightly like in some of these things like GT3 RS. Feels reasonably comfortable. It is always and will always be surprising to me how well this car handles and how sharp the steering is. It is just amazing how quickly the SLS changes directions. You know, I think you'd have to get on a track or some really great roads to really feel the difference between SLS and SLS Black, but this thing still feels just so incredible. And so that's the SLS AMG Black Series, one of the most impressive Mercedes-Benz products ever. The regular SLS is amazing, but this is even more amazing, and it comes with an amazing price tag to match. And now it's time to give it a Doug score.
Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the SLS is a beautiful car, but I've always thought the wing and canards are a bit goofy on this design, and they complicate the look a bit, so the Black Series gets a 7 out of 10, which is 1 point lower than the regular SLS. Acceleration, the Black does 0 to 60 in 3.4 seconds, which gives it a 9 out of 10. Handling is ultra precise, incredibly sharp, and it gets a 9 out of 10. Fun factor is also strong, and it gets an easy 9 out of 10. Cool factor is high too, as everyone knows the SLS is cool, and everyone knows the Black Series is the ultra rare version, so it gets an 8 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 42 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories. Starting with features, the SLS is decently equipped and it gets a 5 out of 10. Comfort is harsh, but nowhere near as bad as some of the complaints I've heard. The ride is stiff, sure, but that comes with the territory, and the seat is comfortable. It gets a 4 out of 10. Quality is high, save for that ugly plastic interior panel, but long-term reliability is uncertain, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Practicality is low due to the small trunk and 2 seats, and it gets a 2 out of 10. Finally, value. As a car to drive, this is absolutely not worth double what the regular SLS is, but as a limited production collectible, it's certainly gaining value, so the value number falls somewhere in between, and it gets a 5 out of 10 for a total daily score of 23 out of 50. Added up, and the Doug score is 65 out of 100, and here's how it stacks up against the other performance Mercedes models I've reviewed. It gets the highest weekend score, which makes sense, but the lowest daily score, which also makes sense. It also ends up tying the regular SLS overall. I think the regular SLS is a better buy if you want a car to drive, but it's hard to argue with the collectability of the Black Series.